Hey, my name's Jon Jon. I sell art on JonJon.co. Today we're going to review The Last Voyage of the Demeter. So this is a film by Ovredal. Time is 1 hour and 58 minutes, so just a little bit longer than the hour and a half that I like, but I think it's justified here with a little bit of extra characters. Actors are Corey Hawkins, plays Clemens. Isley Franciosi plays Anna. Liam Cunningham plays Captain Eliot. David Dastmalchian plays Wojchek. Walley plays Abrams. Jon Jon Briones plays Joseph. Stefan Kapicic plays Olgaren. Javier Botet plays Dracula. So the Demeter obviously stows a deadly cargo aboard in Romania, the shores of Romania, and is making a voyage to England, and they discover there's this monster aboard, and picking them off one by one, will they make it alive to England? So obviously a classic Dracula story based on Bram Stoker's diary within that Dracula, where they're making the trip back to England. Obviously in the book, I think no one makes it alive. The ship crashes on the shore. So you kind of know what the plot is of the film going in. If you know anything about Dracula, well, I've seen several Dracula films. If you don't know anything about Dracula, I think it stands pretty well on its own. They show a little bit of the diary, the captain's diary, that's used as the basis for the film based on Bram Stoker. So I think they have quite a bit of few elements here on Dracula, enough to sell the story on its own if you're brand new to the Dracula. I think it's a fun take, just focusing on the voyage alone from Romania to England. Is kind of a subsector, kind of like Star Wars part, what is it, 4.5 or whatever they slipped in between 3 and 4. It was pretty interesting. 3.5, they made a whole movie there, and this is kind of the same thing. They've put a whole movie inside of just a subsection of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is kind of interesting because you just have this poor last voyage of the ship anyway, and then it turns out there's this monster aboard, so double fatal for the captain. Great mix of characters here on the ship. There's a lot of rivalry, bias, racism, a little bit of everything mixed in together. Young kid there, so it's just a lot of different characters put together, and they're all trying to fight the monster with just taking out the people, and they're suspicious of each other at first. So very kind of cool. It's kind of like Alien meets ship. Although, obviously, Bram Stoker was written before Alien, so probably Alien ripped off Bram Stoker than anything else. It's interesting, too, you have no effect of the crucifix on the monster, which is kind of interesting in the sense it's more realistic. Probably no monster would be impacted by some kind of religious symbol. At the same time, it kind of shows the pointlessness of religion a bit. It's only kind of a personal belief that kind of carries through people through crisis. So that's kind of interesting because it's kind of how I would view religion truly. Obviously, being Hollywood is kind of, they take a more, I would say, atheist agnostic view on religion, and so here it kind of shows a little bit. I wouldn't say it's woke, but probably people in the center of the country might find it offensive. The crucifix has no effect, but I think it's way more realistic. It just doesn't make any sense a symbol would have any effect on a monster, so I really like that. The original idea of the crucifix fighting off Dracula just is kind of stupid. So they really don't know why or how to kill Dracula, which is interesting in the film. There's this interesting take of this girl that's revived from almost the dead that's been drunk upon by Dracula. So that's kind of a cool take in the film, as well as kind of the bad luck of having a girl aboard a sailing ship. You know, obviously that's for obvious reasons. The same thing happens in the Navy. They integrated ships, and what happens on Navy ships is because they're months and months aboard with no port of call, you know, there's the women kind of tend to get raped a lot on these kind of ships. So the same thing back in the day, they would avoid women at all type on sailing ships because it would just lead to a lot of infighting between the sailors. So if it was an all-male ship, you wouldn't have that. You would just be like, all right, there's no one to take advantage of, so you would have that free of mind. So there is some kind of logic to that, and, you know, with today's woke Navy, they've kind of thrown that out the window, and guess what? They have a lot of rape on ships. Like, wow, that was really surprising. They knew about this in the 1800s, but modern man thinks they can beat, you know, what they're going to impose a modern, you know, that's kind of a wokeism. It's in the Navy, but, you know, what are you going to do? I like the sets and the costumes within the film. I think they're really realistically set, which you obviously want in a historical film. You don't want to feel anything ajar, anything modern. So they have none of that. The only thing they do that's modern is they have better CGI, obviously, so you can show kind of a flying Dracula much better than you would in earlier versions of Dracula. A lot of the earlier versions of Dracula, he might show him a little bit of flight, but not really a three-dimensional flight. Here you can do a three-dimensional flight of Dracula, so that's kind of a really cool effect, I think. But still nothing feels like modern in the film, which is really good, I think. The only thing I'd say is modern is they add a touch of racism, which would have been realistic for this time frame. They would have been extremely racist. So they kind of talk about it being extremely racist, but against the doctor, but they don't really show it. They could have showed him, you know, they could have done a flashback scene of him going to school and being reject, 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 you know, and that would have been really cool, I think, to have like a stamp of reject on all his letters for resumes. I think that would have been great. But again, that would have been 5 minutes extra film and a little bit too wokeism, a little bit too far away from the plot of the film. But they did show that the crew members is a little bit racist, but it would have been way more thicker than this, I think. At the same extent, these kind of crew members would sail all around the world, so they'd be way more exposed to different cultures, different types of people. So how racist would they be? I mean, I've traveled a lot myself, and people that have traveled even without any kind of education, if they travel a lot and been around different types of people, they tend to be way more open-minded. So I think that's a fair assessment of the time frame. They wouldn't have been not racist, but they wouldn't have been that open either. So, you know, I think they kind of nail it. They kind of suggest a little bit of that without trying to derail the film too much into that element. But it gives a good build to the doctor's character, and that he's struggling and, like, you know, because they asked him, what are you going to do with your reward? And I just wish I could understand the world, you know. Which no one understands at the point, but it makes sense because, you know, the whole world's against him, even though he did this great degree, but then no one wants to hire him. It's horrible, you know. So another point I think they could have made it a little more historical accuracy is the ship is international. So they could have spoken a little bit of Romanian in the beginning. I think they did a touch, but they could have used a lot more, especially when they're transporting Dracula. That would have been very cool to show. Like when there's a scene where one of the crew members abandons ship because he find out there's this dragon stamp on one of the boxes. He thinks it's cursed. He probably should have flipped it right into Romanian right there, or something where it would be like, oh my God, this is cursed, blah, 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 and you'd be like, what the hell's going on? And it would add a freakier element, I think, if it was in a different language. It would freak out the audience. People that speak only English and never have been exposed to foreign languages in a dramatic way that would really frighten the audience much more. If you think of, I think there was a vampire film, I think it's 28 Days of Night, I think is the name of the film, where it's set up in Alaska and there's 28 days of darkness, and the vampires come out to have a feed fest because there's no daylight, so they don't have to worry about being tagged. And they have their own language where they and they have this special Dracula language, which is really scary as shit. Really well done, I thought. Here, the Dracula doesn't speak anything. He just he talks to them in normal English. But it would have been cool to kind of add those language elements of the crew being scared, and maybe the guy that banished ship, he speaks Romanian or something local and is freaked out and he yells it out in that language. You could have had some of the crew members speaking maybe a Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, kind of trading barbs back and forth in different languages would have been kind of cool. Or slip in a couple of words like that, because crews that work like this, I've worked in an international environment before where the whole crew is Spanish, German, English in Germany. And what tends to happen in that type of environment where people speak 3 languages or 4 languages is they start to blend the languages. It would have been cool to show a little bit of people slipping a word or two of different languages to kind of give that historical feel to the film and more international feel touch to the ship. At the same time, if you do that, then you lose the majority of probably the English-speaking world that only speaks English. They'd be like, what the hell's all these foreign words in there? But I think the audience is smart enough to pick up on that. You don't have to be purely in different languages, but a word or two would give it more of that 1800 ship crewmate, which would have a blend of languages naturally. That would have been a really cool element, I think, to add to give it even more kind of that juiciness language-wise into the film. So they kind of cleaned that up and didn't use any other languages, more or less. So, you know, in that way, it's kind of stereotypical Hollywood touch instead of just having a little bit more juicier with the historical elements like that would be really cool, I think. So that could be one of the improvements to this film. The end of the film was really good. They have the showdown with Dracula, obviously, and the remaining crew members. So that was really cool. And one guy tries to abandon ship, and so there's just various strategies to get away from the monster, or, you know, save yourself or anything, and everything's failing all over the place. So that's kind of cool. And because everyone's getting eliminated, you have no idea, other members have no idea what they learned from the last fight with Dracula, right? So that's kind of a fun element, which would have been realistic in a Dracula type of setting. So I think I'd recommend it. It's really fun. I don't know if you'd watch it multiple times, but it's a very fun watch. If you'd like to see more reviews, you can subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.